That cold November evening, when I got the frantic call telling me to rush to Memorial General Hospital, I thought I was heading there to say my final goodbye to my younger sister. I believed I was about to make the most heartbreaking decision any older sister could ever face. But when I walked into that intensive care unit and reached for the pen they were pushing into my hands, a young nurse suddenly grabbed my arm and whispered with absolute terror in her voice, "Please don't sign anything. I'm begging you. Just give me 15 minutes, and you'll understand why." I stood there frozen, looking between her frightened, desperate face and my brother-in-law James, who was standing on the other side of that hospital bed, and his smile, oh God, his smile was just a little too eager, a little too anxious. I had absolutely no idea that in exactly 15 minutes, I would be staring at security footage that would shatter my entire world into a million pieces. I had no idea that the woman I'd spent nearly 60 years loving, protecting, and caring for was about to become a murder victim, not from some terrible illness, but from the two people who should have loved her most. Before I dive deeper into this absolute nightmare, I need to ask you something really important. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. Have you ever had that feeling deep in your gut that something was terribly, horribly wrong, but everyone around you kept insisting you were just being paranoid or dramatic? Drop a comment below because honestly, that instinct, that little voice inside your head, it might just save someone's life someday. It all started 4 days earlier with a phone call that completely destroyed my peaceful Sunday morning. I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking my coffee, reading the newspaper, just enjoying my retirement, when my phone rang. James's voice was trembling, shaking, breaking when he told me that my baby sister Eleanor had collapsed at their home and was now on life support at the hospital. Brain aneurysm, he said, his voice cracking with what sounded like genuine grief. The doctors weren't giving him any hope. She might never wake up. Eleanor was only 56 years old. 56. She'd been so vibrant, so full of life, so healthy the last time I'd seen her just 3 weeks earlier at our monthly sister lunch date. We'd laughed together about getting older, about her retirement plans, about that trip to Greece she'd been dreaming about for years and years. She'd show me pictures of the islands she wanted to visit, the hotels she'd been researching. And now James was telling me she might never open her eyes again. I drove through the entire night from my home in Pennsylvania to the hospital in Richmond. My hands were gripping that steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white. I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. Eleanor and we'd been inseparable growing up. After our parents died when we were still so young, barely adults ourselves, we only had each other in this whole wide world. I'd practically raised her when I was barely 20 years old myself. I'd been the one to walk her down the aisle when she married James 17 years ago. He was this successful investment banker who seemed to absolutely adore her, who bought her that beautiful house she'd always dreamed of, who promised her he'd take care of her forever and ever. When I finally arrived at her hospital room at 3 a.m, completely exhausted, emotionally destroyed, James was there waiting. His eyes were red and swollen, his face looked devastated, or at least that's what it looked like to me at the time. He hugged me so tight, and he told me the doctors had said there was no brain activity left, that Eleanor would have wanted to go peacefully, with dignity, without suffering. He'd already started talking about funeral arrangements, about how she'd always told him she never wanted to be kept alive by machines, how she'd hate being like this. I was too shocked, too completely grief-stricken to question any of it. I just held my sister's hand, her hand that was still warm, still soft, and I sobbed. I cried like I hadn't cried since our mother died. The next 3 days passed in this horrible blur of doctors with their sympathetic faces and soft voices, James constantly making phone calls about funeral homes and cemetery plots, and me just sitting by Eleanor's bedside for hours and hours, watching these machines breathe for her, watching her chest rise and fall mechanically. But something kept gnawing at me, eating away at the back of my mind. Little things that just didn't quite fit together properly. The doctors never made direct eye contact when they talked about her condition. They'd look at their charts, at the machines, at the floor, anywhere but at my eyes. James kept pushing me, really pushing me hard to sign the DNR order, to authorize removing life support, and there was this urgency in his voice that felt wrong somehow, felt off in a way I couldn't quite explain. And there was this woman, this younger woman, probably in her early 30s, who kept appearing at the strangest hours, standing close to James, touching his arm in a way that seemed far too familiar, too intimate for a casual acquaintance. When I finally asked James who she was, he said quickly, almost too quickly, "Oh, that's Victoria. She's a grief counselor the hospital assigned to help us through this difficult time. She's been such tremendous help, such a comfort." But grief counselors don't usually wear expensive designer handbags or look at a patient's husband the way she was looking at James. And they definitely don't hold his hand when they think nobody's watching. On that Tuesday afternoon, James called me at my hotel room. His voice had this strange brightness to it, this almost cheerful tone that felt completely wrong given the circumstances. "Catherine," he said, and I could hear that fake warmth in his voice, "I think it's time. I know this is incredibly hard for you, but Eleanor wouldn't want this. The doctors say we really should make the decision today. I have all the papers ready and waiting. Can you come to the hospital right now?" Every single cell in my body was screaming that something was terribly, horribly wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was. I'd been a registered nurse myself for 42 years before I retired. I knew how these terrible situations worked. Sometimes families had to make these impossible, heartbreaking choices. I told myself I was just in denial, that I couldn't accept losing my baby sister, my only remaining family. When I walked into Eleanor's room at 4 o'clock that afternoon, James was standing there with Victoria, who wasn't even bothering to pretend to be a grief counselor anymore. She stood way too close to him, almost possessively close, and when I entered the room, they both turned to look at me with these identical expressions that I can only describe as anticipation mixed with impatience. On the bedside table sat a thick stack of papers with a pen placed carefully on top, like they'd staged it there, waiting for me. James started talking immediately, before I'd even fully entered the room. "Catherine, thank you so much for coming. I know how incredibly difficult this is for both of us, but the doctors have made it absolutely clear that Eleanor is gone. Her brain is dead. These papers will allow us to remove all these machines and let her pass peacefully, with dignity, the way she would have wanted. As her sister and her designated healthcare proxy, you need to sign here and here and here." He pointed to 3 different signature lines, talking fast, way too fast for someone who was supposedly grieving. His finger was almost jabbing at the pages urgently. I reached for the pen, my hand actually touching the smooth plastic, when suddenly I felt someone grip my wrist firmly. The young nurse, she couldn't have been more than 27 or 28 years old, with dark brown curly hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, had appeared seemingly out of absolutely nowhere. Her fingers were trembling against my skin, but her grip was surprisingly firm and strong. "Ma'am," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was laced with desperate urgency. "Please don't sign anything. I'm begging you. Just trust me on this." Her eyes darted quickly to James, then to Victoria, and I saw something there in her expression that made my blood run cold. Fear. Real, visceral, genuine fear. James's face went bright red, flushed with anger. "Excuse me, Nurse Martinez, but this is a private family matter. You're completely out of line here. You need to leave this room immediately." But the nurse, Martinez according to her badge, didn't let go of my wrist. Her grip actually tightened slightly. "I need to speak with Mrs. Thompson alone. Right now. It's regarding her sister's medication schedule and treatment plan." "The medication schedule can wait until after we've dealt with this," Victoria snapped, stepping forward aggressively. "Mr. Hayes has been through more than enough, without you hospital people constantly interfering with his decisions." But Martinez stood her ground, and I could see her jaw clench with determination. "Hospital protocol absolutely requires that I speak with family members privately about certain critical matters. It will only take 15 minutes. Just 15 minutes." She looked directly at me with those pleading, desperate eyes, and I felt something in my chest tighten. 15 minutes, Mrs. Thompson. That's all I'm asking from you. Please. Something in her absolute desperation, in the way her voice cracked slightly, made me trust her completely. I set down the pen carefully. James, I think I need a moment anyway. This is all so overwhelming, so much to process. Give me 15 minutes to talk to the nurse, to clear my head and settle my thoughts, and then I'll come back and sign everything. What would you have done in this moment? Would you have trusted a stranger's warning or signed those papers? Let me know in the comments below. I watched James's jaw clench tight, watched Victoria whisper something urgent in his ear, but they couldn't exactly refuse my request without looking incredibly suspicious or heartless. So James nodded stiffly, reluctantly. 15 minutes, Catherine. But please understand, Eleanor's suffering with every moment we delay. Every second we wait is cruel to her. Martinez practically dragged me out of that room, down a long corridor, past confused visitors and busy nurses, and into a small private consultation room. She locked the door behind us with shaking hands, and I saw her hands were trembling so badly she could barely manage the lock. Mrs. Thompson, she said, her voice breaking, I could lose my job for what I'm about to tell you. I could lose my nursing license, my entire career, but I cannot. I will not stand by and watch them murder your sister. The word hit me like a physical punch to my stomach. Murder? What are you talking about? I demanded. The doctors said she's brain dead. They showed me the charts, the test results. The doctors don't know what I know, Martinez interrupted urgently. I've been Eleanor's primary nurse for the past 72 hours. I've been with her almost constantly. I've been watching her neurological responses very carefully, Mrs. Thompson. Your sister is not brain dead. She's in a medically induced coma, yes, but her EEG shows definite activity. Her reflexes are present and responsive. 3 days ago, when Mr. Hayes and that woman weren't in the room, when I was alone with Eleanor, I performed a sternal rub test. She paused, her eyes filling with tears. Your sister grimaced. She responded to pain. Brain-dead patients cannot respond to pain stimuli. My medical training kicked in through the shock and horror. But the doctor's reports, the assessments, they all say. The assessments were all done when Mr. Hayes insisted on being present in the room. Martinez interrupted. I've noticed he always insists on being there during every neurological check. And Mrs. Thompson, I've seen him talking privately with Dr. Harrison, the attending physician. I've seen him hand over what looked exactly like an envelope full of money in the parking garage. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands. Look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just young and inexperienced and seeing things that aren't really there. But 3 nights ago, I couldn't sleep. Something was bothering me. So I came back to check on your sister around 2 in the morning, and I found Mr. Hayes and that Victoria woman alone in the room with Eleanor. The 4-bag had been changed, but it wasn't on any schedule I'd prepared. I checked the bag afterward. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Someone had added additional sedatives, way beyond what was prescribed, way beyond what should ever be given. End part 2. And then she showed me the photos that would prove my worst nightmare was real. She showed me photos on her phone, time-stamped and dated. James leaning over Eleanor's foreline, his hands on the tubing. Victoria standing watch at the door like a lookout. Another photo of the 4-bag label clearly showing medications that absolutely should not have been there, medications that weren't prescribed. I reported it to my supervisor immediately. Martinez continued, her voice cracking with emotion. But Dr. Harrison said I was completely mistaken, that he'd personally ordered the medication change and just forgotten to update the chart properly. He told me very clearly that if I made these accusations again, if I caused any more trouble, I'd be terminated immediately for insubordination and making false claims against patients' families. Tears were streaming down her face now. But Mrs. Thompson, I've been checking Eleanor's chart every single shift. Someone keeps increasing her sedation levels, just enough to keep her completely unresponsive, but not quite enough to actually kill her outright. They need those papers signed first. They need it to look legal, to look like a family decision. My mind was absolutely reeling, spinning out of control. Why? I asked, my voice barely working. Why would James do this to her? He loved her. I saw them together. They were happy. Martinez hesitated, biting her lip nervously. I probably shouldn't tell you this, it's not my place, but I overheard them talking in the hallway yesterday afternoon. That woman, Victoria, she's definitely not a grief counselor. She called him baby. They were talking about finally being free, about some massive life insurance policy, about moving to the Cayman Islands together once it's all over and done with. The pieces fell into place with horrible, sickening clarity. Eleanor's life insurance policy, the massive $4 million policy she'd taken out 6 years ago. The house worth easily $2.5 million. The investment accounts, the retirement savings. My sister had been worth so much more dead than alive to a man who'd apparently found someone younger, someone new. Do you have any actual proof? I asked, forcing my voice to steady. Anything concrete that would stand up legally? Martinez bit her lip harder. Not enough. Just my observations, my photos, my word against a doctor's word, and a wealthy man's reputation. But Mrs. Thompson, if you sign those papers today, they'll remove life support within the hour. I've heard them discussing it. And I truly believe with the right treatment, with proper sedation reduction and real neurological care, your sister could actually wake up. She could recover. Then we need real proof, I said, my mind already working, already planning. 42 years as an emergency room nurse had taught me everything about people, about reading situations, about thinking fast under impossible pressure. And we need it in the next few minutes before James gets suspicious and comes looking for us. An idea formed in my mind, risky, possibly illegal, definitely dangerous, but absolutely necessary. Do you have access to the security camera recordings? Martinez nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. The recordings are kept in the security office downstairs. I'm close friends with Marcus, one of the security guards. If I told him I needed to review footage for a potential incident report for patient safety concerns. Do it, I interrupted. Pull footage from Eleanor's room for the past 72 hours. Focus specifically on times when James was alone with her or with that Victoria woman. And Martinez, I need you to do something else for me too. I pulled out my phone, my hands surprisingly steady now that I had a plan. I'm going to go back into that room and tell them I'm ready to sign everything. But I'm going to stall them, ask questions, make James explain every single detail. I want you to have someone review Eleanor's current sedation levels right now, immediately, without Dr. Harrison knowing anything about it. Is there another doctor here you trust completely? Dr. Chin, Martinez said immediately, her eyes lighting up with hope. He's the head of neurology, and he's not on Dr. Harrison's service at all. He's honest, absolutely old school. He doesn't tolerate any irregularities or suspicious behavior. Get him to examine Eleanor right now, I said firmly. And Martinez, record everything that happens. If James and Victoria say anything incriminating while I'm in there with them, anything at all, we need it documented properly. She nodded, understanding flooding her face. The room has audio monitoring for patient safety purposes. If I activate it from the nurse's station, everything said in that room will be recorded automatically on the hospital system. Do it immediately, I said. I'll give you 25 minutes instead of 15. Tell James the first needed extensive medical clarification about the legal forms and the medical terminology. Had you ever had to stand up against someone powerful when you knew they were wrong? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else find courage. 25 minutes later, I walked back into Eleanor's hospital room, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my face completely composed and calm. Years and years of keeping calm during codes in the emergency room, during terrible traumas and deaths, served me incredibly well now. James stood up immediately, that false concern still plastered across his face like a mask. Catherine, finally. Thank God you're back. Are you ready now? Can we please proceed? Almost, I said carefully, picking up the papers with steady hands. I just need to understand a few more things first. As a nurse, as someone with medical training, I need to be absolutely sure we're doing the right thing for Eleanor. I watched James's left eye twitch slightly. Victoria moved even closer to him, and I noticed for the first time that she was actually holding his hand now, not even trying to hide it anymore, not caring who saw. "What is there to understand?" James said, and I heard an edge creeping into his voice, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "The doctors have been crystal clear about her condition. Eleanor is brain dead. There's no hope whatsoever. There's nothing more anyone can do." "I know that's what Dr. Harrison said," I replied carefully, pretending to read through the document slowly. "But I was just wondering about second opinions. Eleanor always told me she'd want every possible option explored before giving up. Maybe we should consult with another neurologist, get a fresh perspective before we make this final decision." "There's absolutely no time for that," Victoria cut in sharply, then seemed to catch herself. "I mean, what Mr. Hayes is trying to say is that it would only prolong the inevitable and cause Eleanor more unnecessary suffering." "Victoria's absolutely right," James said quickly, too quickly. "And frankly, Catherine, the costs are mounting up astronomically. Every single day on these machines is costing thousands and thousands of dollars. Eleanor wouldn't want to completely drain her estate on medical futility." There it was, the first real slip. He was thinking about her estate, about the money, about what he would inherit. End of part 3. And that's when I decided to push him even harder, to make him reveal his true intentions. "Of course," I said softly, keeping my voice gentle and understanding. "I just want to make absolutely sure I understand the complete medical situation. You said it was a brain aneurysm, correct? But I've seen many aneurysm patients before during my nursing career. Usually there's a CT scan, an angiogram, detailed imaging. I'd really love to see Eleanor's imaging results, just to understand what happened to my baby sister, to understand how this could happen so suddenly." James's face was getting redder and redder. The scans were done. They showed massive hemorrhage throughout her brain. Dr. Harrison has all of them in his files. "I'd still very much like to see them myself," I pressed gently. "And I'd like to understand the timeline better. You said she collapsed at home. Is that right? What exactly was she doing when it happened? Was she showing any symptoms before?" "She was," James started, then paused for just a moment too long. "She was upstairs in the bedroom. I heard a loud thud from downstairs." "What time was this exactly?" "Around 9:30 in the morning." "And you called 911 immediately?" Another pause, longer this time, more hesitant. "Well, I checked on her first, obviously. I had to make sure she was still breathing, assess the situation." "How long before you actually called for help?" "I don't know, Catherine," James snapped, irritation breaking through his facade. "Maybe 15 minutes. I was in complete shock. I didn't know what to do." 15 minutes is quite a long time when someone is having a brain bleed, I said, watching him very carefully, studying every micro-expression. Every single second counts in these situations. Brain tissue dies so quickly without oxygen. Victoria squeezed his hand visibly. "He did the absolute best he could under terrible, traumatic circumstances," she said defensively. "I'm sure he did," I said calmly. "Victoria, you've been so incredibly supportive through all of this. It's really remarkable. How long have you actually known James?" She blinked, clearly caught off guard by the question. "Through the hospital, as I mentioned before, as the grief counselor assigned to this case." "Which agency are you with exactly?" I asked pleasantly. "I'd really love to send them a letter of commendation for your exceptional dedication and support." "That's really not necessary at all," James said sharply, his voice harder now. "Catherine, these questions are completely irrelevant to the situation at hand. The only relevant thing right now is Eleanor's hopeless condition. Now, are you going to sign these papers or not? Because this is getting ridiculous." I looked at my sister lying so still in that hospital bed. The machines breathing for her mechanically, monitoring her vital signs, keeping her alive despite someone's very best efforts to the contrary. "I just need one more thing," I said quietly. "I want to say goodbye to her properly. Alone. Just 5 minutes with my sister, and then I promise I'll sign everything." "We've all said our goodbyes already," James protested, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "There's really no need." "Please," I said, letting my voice crack with real, genuine emotion, letting tears fill my eyes. She's the only family I have left in this entire world. Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. He couldn't refuse that request without looking like an absolute monster. Fine, he said through clenched teeth. 5 minutes. We'll wait right outside in the hallway. As they left the room together, James whispered something to Victoria that I couldn't quite hear, but I saw the way his eyes went to those papers on the bedside table, saw him touch the pen as if to make sure it was still there, still waiting. The moment the door closed behind them, I went immediately to Eleanor's bedside and took her hand gently in mine. "Hold on, baby girl," I whispered close to her ear. "I've got you. I've always got you. I'm not going to let them hurt you." And then I saw it, clear as day. The smallest flutter of her eyelids, so subtle it could have been my imagination, but I absolutely knew it wasn't. Martinez had been right. My sister was in there, fighting to come back. The truth was about to explode in ways I never imagined. Stay with me, because what happened next changed everything forever. Before my 5 minutes were even up, Martinez slipped quietly into the room, her face pale but determined. Dr. Chen reviewed her complete chart and examined her himself. She whispered urgently. "He's absolutely furious, Catherine. Her sedation levels are nearly 4 times what they should be for any patient in her condition. He's already ordered the medications reduced immediately, and he's demanding a full investigation." She held up a tablet computer, her hands still shaking. "And, Catherine, we pulled the security footage. All of it. I watched 72 hours of James's sins play out in fast-forward on that small screen. Him adjusting 4 bags when nurses stepped out of the room. Him and Victoria kissing passionately in the hallway when they thought no one was watching. Him meeting with Dr. Harrison in the parking garage, handing over a thick manila envelope. And most damningly, most horrifyingly, footage from the morning Eleanor collapsed. James entering their bedroom at 8 in the morning carrying a syringe. Eleanor clearly visible through the doorway, still peacefully asleep in their bed. 35 minutes later, James finally calling 911, claiming his wife had just suddenly collapsed. He injected her with something. I breathed, horror washing over me in waves.
He caused this.
He tried to kill her. Dr. Chen has already called hospital security and the police, Martinez said, tears streaming down her face now. They're on their way up right now. But Catherine, James is going to realize something's wrong very soon. We need to keep him here in this room until they arrive. I'll handle it, I said, my voice hard as steel now. Trust me. I walked out to the waiting area where James and Victoria stood close together, whispering urgently. When they saw me approaching, they sprang apart, but not nearly quickly enough to hide what they'd been doing. "I'm ready to sign," I said, my voice hollow and defeated sounding. James's face absolutely lit up with triumph, with victory. "Thank God, Catherine. You're doing the right thing. Eleanor would be so grateful for this mercy." We walked back into the room together, all 3 of us. I picked up that pen, held it carefully over the first signature line, and then I looked up directly at James. "Before I sign," I said calmly, "I just have one simple question. When exactly did you start planning to murder my sister?" End of part 4. The moment of truth had finally arrived, and there was nowhere left for them to run. The room went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. James's face drained of all color, going deathly white. Victoria actually gasped out loud, her hand flying to her mouth. What? What are you talking about?" James stammered, his voice shaking badly now. "Catherine, the grief is making you completely irrational. You need to calm down." "Is it?" I asked, setting down the pen very deliberately. "Is it grief making me notice that you injected Eleanor with something the morning she collapsed? Is it grief making me see that you've been systematically overdosing her on sedatives to keep her unconscious and unresponsive? Is it grief that showed me you bribed Dr. Harrison to falsify her neurological assessments?" "That's absolutely insane," James said, but his voice was shaking uncontrollably. "You have no proof of any." "Actually, we have quite a substantial amount of proof," said a new, authoritative voice from the doorway. Dr. Chen entered the room, his face stern and furious, followed by two uniformed police officers and hospital security guards. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Dr. Chen, head of neurology at this hospital. I've personally reviewed your wife's case in detail, and I am absolutely appalled. Not only has her care been criminally negligent, but there's overwhelming evidence of deliberate harm, of attempted murder." James backed toward the door desperately, but security blocked his path completely. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "I demand to speak to my lawyer immediately." "You'll have that opportunity very soon," one of the police officers said calmly, pulling out handcuffs. "James Hayes, you're under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Victoria tried to run, actually tried to bolt for the door, but the second officer caught her easily, grabbing her arm. "Victoria Morrison, you're also under arrest as an accessory to attempted murder." As they were being led away in handcuffs, James screaming about false accusations and his lawyers, Victoria sobbing hysterically and claiming she didn't know anything, Dr. Chen turned to me with genuine respect in his eyes. "Mrs. Thompson, your sister is being moved to a different unit immediately, under my direct personal care. We're reducing her sedation as we speak, carefully and gradually. If Nurse Martinez's observations are correct, and I believe they are, Eleanor may begin to regain consciousness within the next 24 to 48 hours. I felt my knees go weak, and Martinez caught my elbow, steadying me. "She's going to be okay," she whispered. "The next few days will be critical," Dr. Chen said honestly, professionally. "But yes, I genuinely believe she has a real, fighting chance at recovery. Thanks to you and Nurse Martinez, we caught this in time. You saved her life." I looked at Martinez, this incredibly brave young woman who'd risked absolutely everything to save a patient she barely knew. "Thank you," I whispered through my tears. "You saved my sister's life." She smiled through her own tears. "It's what we're supposed to do, right? First, do no harm. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life." 48 hours later, I was sitting right there holding Eleanor's hand when her eyes finally fluttered open. The confusion in them cleared slowly, gradually, as the last of those terrible sedatives wore off from her system, and then she focused on my face, really seeing me. "Catherine," she whispered, her voice raspy and weak, but it was her voice, my sister's voice, and it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. "I'm here, baby girl," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "I've got you. I've always got you." "What happened?" she asked weakly. "I don't understand. Where am I?" "That's a very long story," I said, tears streaming down my face. "But the short version is that your husband is an absolute monster, and you're going to be just fine. You're going to be perfectly fine." Over the next 2 weeks, as Eleanor grew stronger every single day, the full horrifying scope of James's betrayal came to light. He'd been planning this for at least 8 months, maybe even longer. Victoria Morrison was a woman he'd met at an investment banking conference 18 months ago, and they'd been having an affair ever since. When Eleanor mentioned wanting to update her will to leave more money to various charities, James had completely panicked. He'd needed her dead before she could change anything. The injection that morning had been a carefully calculated dose meant to cause a stroke or aneurysm without being obviously poisonous on autopsy. With Dr. Harrison's help, bought for $75,000, they'd falsified her medical records to show brain death when she was merely deeply, artificially sedated. The life insurance policy would have paid out $4 million. The house, the investment accounts, everything would have belonged to James. He and Victoria had already booked their flights to the Cayman Islands, scheduled to leave the very day after Eleanor's planned death. But instead, James and Victoria were both facing 25 years to life for attempted murder. Dr. Harrison lost his medical license permanently and faced serious charges of conspiracy and medical fraud. And Eleanor, against absolutely every odd, made a nearly complete recovery. 7 months later, I stood beside Eleanor in divorce court. She was thinner than before, walked with a slight limp that the neurologist said might never fully disappear, but she was alive and strong and fierce. The judge granted her everything, every single penny, every asset. James would have nothing but his prison cell for the next several decades. As we walked out of that courthouse into the bright, warm sunshine, Eleanor linked her arm through mine. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. "Thank you for not signing those papers, for trusting your instincts, for fighting for me." "Thank Nurse Martinez," I said. "She's the real hero of this story." "I plan to," Eleanor said, and she smiled. "In fact, I'm funding a full scholarship in her name at the nursing school for students who show exceptional moral courage and dedication to their patients." We walked in comfortable silence for a moment, just being together, being alive. Then Eleanor stopped and looked at me, really looked at me. "You know what's funny?" she said. "James thought I was worth more dead than alive. But he was completely wrong. I'm worth so much more alive. I get to see my nieces graduate from college. I get to take that trip to Greece I've been dreaming about. I get to testify against him in court and watch him go to prison." She smiled, and it was fierce and beautiful. "And I get to live my life knowing that no matter what he tried to take from me, he failed completely." For months after that, Eleanor and I sat together on a beautiful beach in Santorini, Greece, watching the sunset paint the Aegean Sea in shades of gold and pink and orange. She'd insisted that Nurse Martinez join us, and the young woman sat beside us on the sand, experiencing her first real vacation in 3 years. "To second chances," Eleanor said, raising her glass of wine toward the sunset. "To listening to your gut instincts," I added, clinking my glass against hers. "To doing the right thing, even when it's absolutely terrifying," Martinez said softly. We clinked our glasses together as the sun dipped below the horizon, and I thought about how incredibly close we'd come to losing everything, to losing Eleanor forever. 15 minutes. That's all it had taken. 15 minutes of trusting a stranger's desperate, urgent warning. 15 minutes that changed absolutely everything. So I want to ask you, have you ever had that moment? That split second where you had to choose between what seemed logical and sensible and what your instincts were screaming at you? Share your story in the comments below, because you truly never know who might need to hear it, who might need that encouragement to trust themselves. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, please share it with others. Because somewhere out there right now, someone might be facing their own 15-minute decision. Let's make sure they make the right one. Let's make sure they trust that voice inside them. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you want to hear more true stories that will make you think twice about trusting the wrong people, subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. I'll see you in the next story. And remember, always, always trust your instincts. They might just save a life. They might just save everything.